Hi, and welcome to the Ionic in 30 webinar. We're going to cover everything that you may need to know about Ionic in roughly 30 minutes or less. But at any point during this, you feel like you've missed something or you just want to go back and watch another section for reference, don't worry, we're going to be sharing the recording of this afterwards. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to use the little Q&A toolbar down below. Add your questions to the queue, and we'll try to get through them at the end of this session. So let's go and introduce your host today, and that is me. But that is not a very friendly face right there, so let's update this photo real quick. Much better. So my name is Mike Hartington. I am the Director of Developer Relations here at Ionic. All that means is that I try to make sure that developers are happy and successful while building Ionic apps. So if there's anything that I can do to help you along your way, please reach out and let me know. You can find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, GitHub, all with the same handle of M Hartington. Let me know your questions, what are your pain points, and potentially what are some future topics that you're interested in hearing in these webinars. I'd love to see what we can do for our community. But let's dive into the meat of this presentation and kind of understand what is Ionic. Now, you might be familiar with Ionic, reason why you signed up here, but maybe you want to share this with a friend, or maybe you want to explain what we do to somebody who's not familiar. Well, in a nutshell, Ionic is a platform for building amazing mobile apps with the power of web technology. We offer you some core building blocks, our Ionic framework, to help you structure your app and build out the UI in a way that feels familiar to web developers. We provide a native platform so that way you can deploy those apps and access native device features right from JavaScript capacitor. And in doing so, we provide a unified CLI that can adapt to the various front end frameworks of today and have you building your apps and then deploying them all from a very streamlined interface, our Ionic CLI. Along the way, if you feel like you need some extra help or extra features, we have some additional services that you can opt into as well. We have a collection of plugins and components for things like authentication, security, that a lot of people use for very sensitive apps. And then a mobile CI/CD platform that is tailor-made for mobile apps specifically, and not just your generalized CI/CD platform. So you can go ahead, have your apps be pre-built, all from a Git commit, and then go ahead and deploy those to get a native binary or have a live update to be deployed to your users, all from our CI/CD platform. And if you're a larger enterprise and you feel like you need a little bit more help, a little bit more of assistance along the way, we have an enterprise support offering that you can take advantage of to help you get along that last little bit of development that you're working on, and maybe you're stuck with something. We can be there to help you figure out your problems and get you over the finish line. Now, Ionic, you might be aware of it, like I said. Maybe you aren't sure how widely it's used or what the impact of Ionic is. Really, we're pretty impactful. We are in the top 10% of apps out there in iOS. So 10% of the App Store in iOS is using Ionic in some degree. And about 15% of the Android apps out there are using Ionic as well. So if you think about the size of the App Store and how much they are growing every single year, this is a huge percentage. Ionic is powering all these apps, and people are very successful. Now, Ionic itself is split up internally roughly about 4 different pillars, right? We have this build, secure, connect, and deliver kind of mentality, but really we can think of it as our open source platforms and then our enterprise offerings for customers. Now, we're going to focus on the open source side of things because this is probably where people are going to be spending most of their time getting familiar with Ionic and getting familiar with the ecosystem. So let's dive into this. Now, if we think about the traditional development process, we probably have a project scope, comes down, and then gets split up amongst the different development teams, right? Your iOS dev team is going to be working in Swift, Xcode, and dealing with the iOS ecosystem. You'll have your native Android team that's going to be working with Java or Kotlin inside of Android Studio. Then you'll have your web team, trusty HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and they're going to be working with their various editors that they are familiar with, and then maybe a desktop team as well, which can be using a whole different set of tools. This is the typical development process that most people are probably going to be familiar with. Now, there's a lot of downsides to this approach, right? Each team is going to be siloed from one another. So as features get built out and different aspects are added to their apps, you're going to lose some feature parity across the product suite. So your iOS team might be able to add a new feature and your Android team might not be able to do that, as in the feature doesn't exist on the platform or they're just not sure how to do that. Same can go for the web and for the desktop. You're going to have code that is duplicated across all these platforms, basically throwing in a lot of time and money to develop an app multiple times. Really not a great process. Now, with Ionic, we try to simplify this entire process by giving you one streamlined flow of project scope, development team, and then having multiple outputs for the product. So your web development team can be using Ionic and Ionic's open source technologies, and they can develop an iOS app, an Android app, a mobile website, or even a desktop web app, all with the same code base, all with the same access to native features. Just write once, run anywhere. It really is that simple these days. So we have this SDK, but really it's divided into the app UI, the core native runtime, and then the underlying technologies there. This is where you can get this whole write once, run anywhere, and we like to call this web native, where the approach is you're building out your app using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That way your UI and your interactions are all happening using web technologies. When you need to go down and actually access native device features, we're going to provide those through JavaScript, so everything feels right at home for a web developer. And then when you need to go ahead and access, say, a native device feature, and maybe it's something that we don't support or it's something that's brand new, we should be able to give you hooks into that, so that way you could write the Swift code or write the Java and Kotlin code if you need to. Most likely you won't, though. So let's dive into that open source SDK and understand the building blocks here. So starting off, we have Ionic Framework. Now, this is packed with over 100 different components that you can use inside of your app. Everything starting off from the basic building blocks, what we call atoms, your little notification widgets, your buttons, your range sliders, toggles, checkbox, you name it, we have it. These components can be built up together with multiple other components to create something like a molecule component. We think about a card. A card is a very simple concept, but it is made up of a lot of little pieces. So we have a card image, card header, subtitle, what have you. These components can all be composed together to create much more complex UI element, and it's all done through web technology. They're mobile ready first, and so they're able to adapt to the smallest form factor and the least screen real estate, and then be able to adapt to the larger screens as the space becomes available. And what's key about these components is that they have this really nice adaptive design. So the design itself can not only adjust to the platform. So right now, if we're on iOS, it's going to look like iOS. And if we're on Android, it's going to look like an Android app. But they can also be completely customized to fit your own UI and design theme. Every app should have its own branding and its own design. And to do this, we provide a collection of CSS variables that you can tweak inside of your app to completely retheme how the app looks and feels inside of your project. Really, really awesome stuff. Now, once you have that app built out, you're going to want to access these native device features. And to do that, we have that project capacitor. Capacitor allows you to take your web app, deploy it to a native iOS runtime or a native Android runtime, and then access those native device features through JavaScript. We provide a collection of plugins or packages that will allow you to target, say, the file system, camera, or Bluetooth. And once you have that installed into your project, you now have access to those features and can go ahead and start to call them all through your TypeScript or JavaScript. Now, we have this split off into two different collections of packages or plugins. Official ones that we maintain, which include all of the what we consider core native functionality, geolocation, notifications, push notifications, what have you. And then there is a collection of community plugins that you can use for things that maybe don't make sense to exist in core, for things like Stripe payments or things like sign in with Apple. Various different plugins that you can use, and you can find it on the Capacitor community or anywhere on npm. You can use any of these plugins regardless of your knowledge of native technologies. So really, you can find a plugin, install it, and start calling these APIs without really having any knowledge of how the native technologies work. You really just need to know how JavaScript works. That's great. Then to kind of piece everything together and provide a very streamlined process, like I said, we have the Ionic CLI. Now the CLI is going to be something that everyone will use and can give you a project to get started with, or can build your project if you've already created one. So to get started, you can install the CLI with npm install-g at Ionic CLI, and then you can go ahead and start a brand new project. Now it could be an Angular, a React, or a Vue project. We'll go over all of those. And then you can pick from a bunch of different templates, things like a tabs-based interface, a side menu, or just a blank starter to get up and running. Once you have that project created, you can CD into it, open up your favorite editor, and then run Ionic Serve, and you're off to the races. This really simplifies the whole entire process of how you actually go ahead and build out a project and get that native access. So we're going to stop here real quick, and we're going to look at a demo. We're going to start to build out our project. We're going to be using some rich text editing. We're going to be using a file system API. We're going to be doing it from your favorite framework of choice. And then all of this is going to be deployed to not only iOS, but also to Android. So let's get over to my terminal and start right now. All right, so we're going to build a demo app using Ionic, React, Capacitor, and a rich text editor called Quill.js. And to get started, we're first going to verify that we have the CLI installed. To do that, we can run ionic-v just to check to see if it's available. And if we already have it installed, we should get the version printed out. And you can see I am a version behind, but we can move along without updating. But if you do see this, be sure to update. If you don't have the CLI installed, you can always run it with npm install-g at Ionic CLI. And this will go ahead and fetch the latest version for you. Now to start a new project, what we're going to do is run Ionic start. And when we hit enter, we'll be prompted to use the app creation wizard. But for this, we're going to say no. And then we're prompted to pick our framework of choice. We have the option of either using Angular, React, or Vue. But for this case, we're going to use React. And then we're going to give it a name for the project. In this case, I'm just going to use temp React, hit enter, and then we can pick our starting template. So we have a blank project template, which is basically one route, a list with a little bit more data, my first app, which is a guided tutorial template, side menus are a template with a swipeable menu from the side, and then the tabs template is the standard tabs-based interface that most people are familiar with. For our test, we're going to go with blank, and we're going to let this install all the dependencies it needs and create our project. With our project created, we can cd into temp React, and then we can start opening up our editor. So if we were to look around the project a bit, you notice that it is a fairly typical React project using Create React App and using React scripts as our build tool. We do have two additional files in here, our capacitor config file, which allows us to configure different aspects of our native project, like the bundle ID, the app name, where it should be pulling the web assets for the native project, and then whether or not we should be bundling the web runtime. We're setting this to false because we're using a build tool, so it'll go ahead and bundle this for us automatically. And then we have our Ionic config JSON, which allows us to provide more information about our project, what the name is, integrations, for this case, it's using capacitor, and then the project type, so React, to tell the Ionic CLI how it should serve and build the project. So let's go ahead and look in the source directory. We can see we have an index.tsx. So this is a project using TypeScript and TypeScript JSX. We have a few other files that are typical to a React app setup. And then inside of our TSX, we're just creating a new root instance. And then we are rendering this app component. So let's take a look at that. And then our app component has all of the additional features that we need. So it has the routing logic for React Router DOM. It has a few components that we're using from Ionic React. It's setting up our Ionic React Router integration, so wrapping everything that React Router provides to automatically give you those transition and animations. And then it has our home component, which is going to be rendered for the first initial route. Below this, we have a bunch of additional CSS files, which are split up into required CSS for Ionic and then these optional CSS utilities. We can think of this like a Tailwind Lite, basically giving you classes that you can apply to modify the padding, the floating, text transforms, flex utilities, and then the display. Our theme for the entirety of the app, where we can modify colors, layout, basically at a global level. This setup Ionic React function, which is going to initialize some of the required functionality that Ionic React needs. And then our app component, where we have this Ion app, which is going to scope all of the styles and all of the functionality into a single point. Our Ionic React router, and then our Ion router outlet component, which is going to act as a wrapper for all the routes that we want to navigate to. Here we have home, and then we have our route, which we are just going to redirect to home. So to better visualize what we have, let's open up a new terminal. We're going to run Ionic serve. And you can see it's going to run React scripts start under the hood to actually start our live reload server. And then we'll do quick little window management. Go back to our editor, and we can start to inspect the home component to see what we have going on. Looking at the structure of our component, we have this Ion page component, which is going to give us a wrapper for everything that can be rendered inside of this individual page. So as the component gets animated in and out during the route changes, the Ion page will keep everything together, so that way we know what to animate and what to remove from the DOM afterwards. We have this Ion header, toolbar, and title being rendered. So we can see we have the title of blank. Let's rename this to home. And then we can see that updated inside of our app. So we not only have the dev server running, but we can have the hot module replacement that React is known for. We have this Ion content with a second header, which seems a little odd. And then our Explorer container component that we're rendering out in the main content. So let's take a look at this header real quick, because this is going to show an example of a component that is specific to a certain platform. So while we're not able to see this header in the app at this point in time, if we were to come over to our dev tools, we can go over to user agent, and we're going to mimic an iPhone we can see the header automatically. Right now we just have blank, which is coming from this second Ion title. To see clearer what's happening here, let's delete the component, and we're going to just put in some placeholder content real quick. And we'll save. And as we come over to the browser and we start to scroll, you can see that the blank title fades away and reveals the original one at the top of our page. This is to more accurately emulate how iOS has the large title when you're at the top of the scrolling container, and then has the more traditional block level title as content starts to push everything up. So to better show how this can work, let's replace the blank with home again. And then as we start to scroll, you can see that fade happening and really pushes the iOS design. Let's go ahead and replace all of the placeholder content and actually start to make use of some other components inside of Ionic. The first one we'll look at is Ion Item. Now, Ion Item is a standard item component that feels right at home for this iOS design. To make this a little bit more dynamic, let's go ahead and create an array. And we're just going to map over all of this. We'll just say entry, and then we'll return that Ion item. And instead of rendering just item, we'll also render entry. And then we'll also set the key to also equal the entry. When we save, we now have 4 items being rendered in our app component. Let's go ahead and create a new page here. Inside of the pages directory, we're going to add an edit.css and then an edit.tsx. And then inside of the tsx, we'll have a const edit, and it's going to equal a function, which we will return. And then we're going to return a little bit of placeholder content. So let's just copy this Ion page, and then we'll paste this, and then fix all of the import statements real quick. And then we're going to delete the mapping statement. And then we'll just export default edit. When we save this, we can then go back over to our app.tsx, and we're going to render a new route. Instead of the path being home, it's going to be edit, and then we can update this to be the edit component. We can save. Now let's go back to our home component. Now, what we want to be able to do is to have somebody tap on one of the items to navigate to our edit page, and then be able to get the item that they clicked on and load that information to display it to the user. So to do this, we're going to make use of a router link prop. This is going to allow us to navigate to the edit page, but then we're also going to append the entry to that URL, so that way we can go to edit/0, edit/1, and so on. To do this, we need to correct an earlier mistake where we forgot to include an extra route here where we can pass in a dynamic slug, and this time we're going to pass in the ID as a param. We'll save this, and just to test to see if the navigation is working, we can click on our items, and then we can navigate forward and backwards. Now let's open up our edit page, and let's start to add some features here that will allow us to handle navigation, but also display the user content we are passing in. So first thing we're going to do is replace any reference of home with edit. And then we're going to import a new component inside of this Ion toolbar. This is going to be called Ion Buttons. And then we'll import it. And this is going to allow us to render a collection of child buttons, which can all be displayed horizontally in our header bar. For instance, we want to include this Ion back button component, and this is going to allow us to navigate back inside of our app. But if we end up on this edit page and we have no app history to navigate back to, we can set this default href, which will allow us to provide a default route that we can navigate to. So let's save this. So if we come over to this browser and we click our item, we now get this back button displayed for us. And if we reload this page to simulate not having any app history, we could hit back and we're automatically going to go back to our main route. Now we're navigating around and we're passing in the item into the URL, but how do we display it? To do this, we're going to make use of a function from React Router. So we'll create a variable called ID, and then this is going to be equal to use params from React Router. Now we're going to type this real quickly just to make sure that we have some TypeScript knowledge here. And we're going to say that the ID is just going to be equal to any for now. Then to access the ID, we're going to go ahead and come down to our Ion content, and we're going to create a little h1 saying the current item is, and then we'll just render ID right inside of these curly braces. So we'll save, come over to our browser, and we'll click item 2, and then we'll get the current item is number 2. So even though Ionic's router is handling all of the navigation and providing all the transitions, the functionality from React Router can still be used inside of your app. Let's go back to our home page, and instead of using these items that we have here, let's use Capacitor and the file system API to get access to our device files and render those out to our app. To do that, let's open up a new terminal window and install 2 new dependencies. So first one we're going to install is at capacitor file system, which is going to give us access to the file system API. And then we're going to install another package called React Quill, which is going to give us a rich text editor, so that way we can write files to the file system. With those dependencies installed, let's go back to our app. And we're going to open up our homepage component again. And we're going to start off by importing from at capacitor file system. This is going to let us have access to the file system API, the directory enum, and then this file info interface, so that way we can type everything correctly. So to start off, we're going to create this quick little no-op function, which is just going to return true. And then we're also going to create a new variable using React's useState function. Now useState is going to be set to a empty array to start off with, but we're going to set its type to be file info and then an array. From this, we can then go ahead and create a notes variable and then a set notes variable. So that way we can update our component whenever we have new notes. After creating these 2 variables, let's go ahead and create a new function called makeDir. This is going to be an async function. And inside of this function, we're going to return await file system dot makedir. Now makedir requires some options. First is the path, which is where we want to create our directory. And then it also needs a scope on where to create this directory. So for this, we'll set our directory, and we're going to set it to directory.documents to store it in the system's documents folder. But we're not done here. Let's go ahead and copy makedir And then we're going to rename this readdir. And then we're going to replace our file system.makedir with readdir. So this is going to do the same exact thing. Instead of making a directory, it's just going to read a directory and return an array of files from that directory if any files exist. Now to call these two, we're going to create one more function called init file system. And then this is just going to be a function. And we'll kick things off by calling makedir, which is a promise. So then we will handle the callbacks here with our no-op function, since we really don't care what happens afterwards. After handling makedir, we'll then call readdir to read the directory that we either just created or already existed. And then from there, we get one more callback. And inside of that, we're going to get our results from the readdir call, which we can destructure to get files. And then inside of files, we can call set notes to set our notes to the value of our files. But we're going to sort these real quick. To sort these, all we're going to do is call files.sort and then pass in a quick little sorting comparison where it's going to look at some part of the file name and sort it by that number. Let's format things quickly. Now with this in place, to call init file system, we're going to make use of a lifecycle hook that Ionic provides called use Ion Vue did enter. This is a function that gets called anytime the current page becomes the active view and the animation and transition has completed, and so the component is basically ready to be presented. So inside of here, we're going to call init file system, and then we can save. Now, down in our render function, instead of using this array here, we can get rid of that and hit notes. And then let's just rename entry to be note. And then we will make this note.name. The key will be note.name. And then instead of rendering item entry, what we're going to render instead is just the name of the note. Let's save. And now we have nothing displaying on our home component, which is to be expected because we have no files saved. So to handle making new notes, let's go ahead and get rid of this router link and then come up to our toolbar, and we're going to use Ion buttons. We'll import that. And then inside of Ion buttons, we'll put in a button, and then we'll use the router link on this to link to the edit page. And then this will just use add, and then we'll import the button from Ionic React. We also need to make sure that we set the Ion button slot property to be end, so that way it will render on the edge of our screen on the right side. So then when we save, we now have a new add button on the right side of our screen. Now let's go ahead and update our edit page to add some new UI elements. Starting off inside of our edit page, let's create some new state, and we're going to use state for this, and we're going to set the default value to an empty string. And we'll have our state be called content, and then we'll have set content as the way to update it. And then inside of our Ion content, we're going to replace everything in here with a single React Quill component that we can import React Quill from React Quill. Now back into the content, Quill takes a few properties that we need to set. First one being theme, which we're just going to set to the default theme of snow. It'll have a value, which we will set to our content state. And then it has an onChange prop, which we will use the set content to update our state as we start typing. Now, if we try to save this and then navigate to the edit page, our editor doesn't really look right. And that's because we have also missed the import statement for the actual Quill Snow CSS. So these are the styles that we need. And then our editor starts to look a little bit better. Of course, we can always import this edit.css file. And then we can go ahead and open this to make it even better. When we save our edit page with the new CSS in there, our editor looks a little bit more appropriate for the form factor. Now, inside of our editor, we can start to type some stuff out. And then we can use Quill to make changes on this content. And we have a file that's ready to be written. Now we just need to add a way to write this file and save it to our file system. To do this, we're going to replace this back button with a new Ion button. And we'll make sure to import that. And we're going to set the slot on the Ion buttons to be N to make sure it's all the way on the right-hand side. Now this button is going to have a on-click handler. And inside of here, we're going to use this function that we'll write later called save. And then we'll set the text for the Ion button to be save as well. Now to implement save, we'll create a new save variable, which is going to equal an async function. And then inside of this, we're going to first start off by giving the file a name. So we'll say const file name is going to equal a note dash $curly.txt. And then inside of this $curly, we'll just do a date.now to get a little unique ID for this moment. And then we can await file system dot write file. Now this is going to be familiar to our make dir, where we're going to pass in a path. And then the prefix for this is going to be notes $curly, passing in the file name. The data that we're going to use here that's going to be written to our file is going to be the content, or we'll just pass in a empty string. From here, we need to add our directory scope, and this will be the directory enum. And then we'll scope it to the documents folder. And we'll fix this import. And then finally, we need to set the encoding to be the encoding type that we want to use for this file. In this case, we're just going to use UTF-8. Now we can write a file, but we're pretty much stuck on this page as we've gotten rid of our back button. This isn't a problem though, because we can make use of the router from Ionic by using the use Ion router function. This is going to give us access to the entire routing system. And after our file has been written, we can call router.goback to navigate back into our app. When we save, we can go back to our app, we can click save, and then we'll have a new note be rendered right to our home screen. Let's get back to the slides and start to wrap up this webinar. Awesome. Now, we've just gone over the very basics of how to get started with Ionic and its open source stacks. What about these other pillars that Ionic tries to focus on? What about secure? Well, our secure platform involves three different aspects: Ionic authentication, storage, and biometrics. We like to refer to these as the security trifecta, which includes a whole flow of how you can authenticate securely, use biometric features to authenticate and authorize users, and then secure that information on your device using our secure storage um, offering. All these combined together really are, a triple threat of how you can properly secure and authenticate your users inside of your app. For the Connect, we're going to look at how we can, utilize other different services that exist outside of Ionic. Um, for example, say you wanted to use Couchbase Lite, Apple Pay, Google Pay, or whatever. We have gone through and created a bunch of different components and packages that you can integrate with your app to make sure that you can call these different services all from your TypeScript or your JavaScript. Um, Really, there shouldn't be any more that you need to do. We can take care of a lot of this integration for you and make sure that you're just having to call the correct package. And now you can connect to Couchbase Lite or Apple Pay, what have you. And then the last of these pillars is the deliver. It's not enough that you have to build your app. What can we do to help you deliver this app to your users? And like I said, that includes our CI/CD service that we call AppFlow. Now, AppFlow is tailor-made specifically for mobile apps, and so it's going to feel familiar enough for folks who have used other more generic CI/CD tools, but offer a lot of functionality that is only going to be applicable to a mobile app. So you can go ahead, you can have your app get built on every single commit, but then go ahead and take that build and generate a native binary. That binary can be downloaded and shared in various different places like TestFlight or Google Beta, or you can go ahead and have that be deployed to your users through our deploy feature. All this together gives you a pretty awesome experience and a pretty seamless development experience from building your app to shipping it to your users. Now, closing out, we're inviting you all to just be a part of our community. We have a huge presence all over the world with tons of developer communities existing in, say, London, Amsterdam, or right here in the US. Join these meetup groups or join our developer community inside of the forum or Discord. Ask some questions on Stack Overflow or our forum, or if you're inclined to, answer some questions. We'd love to have people be involved in helping one another. So if you want to join our forum, you can check out forum.ionicframework.com. That'll be our main hub for asking and answering questions. If you want to join the Discord, you can check out this link right here. Discord will be our main chat platform where you can ask us and interact with the community in a pretty relaxed way. And then if you want to know more about Ionic, you can go ahead and check out ionic.io/docs, and that'll teach you everything that you need to know about the Ionic platform. So let's hand it over and start going over some questions.